All right, y'all. Welcome to the Lower Chesapeake Bay Fishing Report, part of the Great Days Outdoors podcast network. I'm your host, Luke Barton, and each week we'll be talking with expert charter guides and subject matter experts about what's happening in our local waters. On this show, we advocate for sustainable fishing practices aimed at keeping this amazing fishery healthy and thriving for generations to come. As the fishing season adjusts to cooler temps, some target species are just heating up. So buckle up for another great episode. Let's jump in and find out what's been biting. Hooked on fishing? Then you're part of the local community that Long Bay Point Bait and Tackle cares about serving and giving back to, providing you with the right selection for each season's target species. They're your one-stop shop to gear up with the best bait, tackle, and insider tips to catch your next trophy fish. You can fuel up right out front on the water and then chat with the crew inside for hot tips on where they're biting. So swing by today. Long Bay Point Bait and Tackle, where your fishing adventures start and finish with your trophy catch on their scales. Listen up. AFTCO has a promotional gift for all Great Days Outdoors Podcast Network listeners. They're now offering a camo sunglasses cleaner cloth with any purchase of AFTCO products. For those cold, wet, or windy days, I especially enjoy my weatherproof fabric barricade jacket, as well as my helm insulated fishing gloves. All you got to do to get your coupon code is text LCBFR to 779-345-2918. You'll get subscribed to our email list, and we'll send you the promo code via email. All right, y'all. Welcome to the Lower Chesapeake Bay Fishing Report, part of the Great Days Outdoors podcast network. I'm your host, Luke Barton, and each week we'll be talking with expert charter guides and subject matter experts about what's happening in our local waters. On this show, we advocate for sustainable fishing practices aimed at keeping this amazing fishery healthy and thriving for generations to come. As the fishing season adjusts to cooler temps, some target species are just heating up. So buckle up for another great episode. Let's jump in and find out what's been biting. All right, guys. Well, welcome to this segment. This week was one of those kind of mark moments in our time as fishermen, as we learned some new things that are being changed by the VMRC specific to cobia. And I'm very grateful to have on the show with us a friend of the show, Captain Chris Ludsford with Pleasure House Oyster Company. Welcome back, man. How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Glad to be here. Hopefully we can answer some questions tonight and just always eager to help.
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say, thank you for being on that board and serving. That's an incredible time commitment and something that, is, I would say, probably a little bit of a thankless job, but it's great that you do that because it makes a big impact.
Sure. Yeah, well, appreciate it. And you guys got, say you guys, but we've got recreational representatives, we've got, commercial representatives, we've got, we try to have everybody, at the table that can represent the spectrum of people in the marine fisheries. And I really liken myself to both, because as I told you, I'm partial to common sense, number one, and I'm partial to equity, amongst the user groups, at least over history. And I think people that know me will say, that I try to be fair and objective about this stuff. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that probably sets the stage properly that, disclaimer for this discussion is nothing we're talking about is final or decided. These are simply sharing of opinions and thoughts from
Sure.
our unique perspectives. Also want to give a shout out to Travis Kemp, Foolproof Fishing, for posting about this and raising some awareness. He caught my attention, and that's the reason that I went out. Of course, Robbie Bryan with Real Release was there, as well as Captain Zach Hoffman with Salt Treated Fishing, who I understand has been there for over 20 years participating in these
Oh
meetings.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everything you can
Yeah.
name, yeah. He's been there, not only cobia, but drum, flounder. Yeah. Other issues. Yeah.
That's awesome.
He's definitely been a good steward.
Yeah, and that's a great word for what we're going to talk about is like the real essence of all of this is stewardship, which is an
Yeah.
individual responsibility that we all share.
Yeah.
So I'd like to start with some basic understanding. So VMRC board, describe to me the role you play on that board and what that board's purpose is.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's called a finfish subcommittee, and there are a number of subcommittees. Some of them handle oysters, crabs, and what it is the actual commissioners. There's VMRC commission. They actually vote and turn this stuff into rules, laws, size limits, creel limits, seasons. But they look at us as a subcommittee to hash this stuff out, at the user level, at the fisherman level, with representation from all the groups. And we take a vote, and then staff says, hey, this is what Finfish decided, or this is what the flavor of the Finfish committee. So the committee I'm on, and we're all volunteers. We have to be approved by the commissioner to be on that committee. There's an attendance requirement. They want people who are serious. And so they look at us as a way to hash it out so that by the time it gets to the actual commission day or commission meeting, which is once a month, usually the fourth Tuesday or last Tuesday, I can't remember, there's an actual commission meeting. And those are the big dogs. Those are the commissioners appointed by the governor, and their decisions become law or rule. They don't do code. Code of Virginia is obviously the big national assemblies. So anyway, we work it out. We take a vote, and hopefully it's unanimous. We like to have unanimous. We like to have consensus, and then the commission looks at that and says, "Wow, they've basically rubber stamped it for us." On occasion, it can be, 4-5 or 7-6 votes. Depending on attendance. Last night we had great attendance. So we basically are the first line of evaluation and hashing this stuff out, so that the commission can not have to deal with it all in one day.
That makes a lot of sense. And what I observed last night too is that sometimes we hit certain topics that have a lot of conflict around them because there's different parties with different interests. And so you guys are able to then serve to either kind of hash it out right then and there and come up with a solution that is equitable compromise, or put a motion into place like we did last night on certain topics to table this for a specific work group to take a deeper dive and say, what, we don't have all the information ready right now to make an informed decision. And then for those listening, effectively you're saying you guys serve as a volunteer committee to flesh things out and make sure that what's being decided by the commission, the next level up, is fair and equitable, and that there's going to be receptance to it. And then you guys vote on that, and then the VMRC folks take that to the commission, and then they are able to make decisions based off of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And like I say, sometimes when it's not good, we do, like you said, on one particular issue, won't get into that, but we kick it back to staff and say, hey, we're not ready to take this to the commission level.
Yeah.
So yep.
So you getting involved as a volunteer, obviously there's no pay involved. So what, for our listeners, what inspired you to get involved, and what's your passion and drive for, the time commitment?
Well, I served as an alternate when that could be done. Currently, they're not allowing alternates, but for 20 plus years, you could actually have an alternate, sit in for you if you were a member of Finfish. And I did that for a number of people for a long time. And they could be out of town fishing or doing something, or family issue. So, and I've always wanted to be involved because, and it sounds cliche, but there's that old saying: if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have a say so, in the future of my fun and my income.
Yeah.
So I started and I served on some other task forces. Some of the names you mentioned earlier were on task forces with me that handled commercial hook and line licenses, believe it or not, crabbing, so my mother is on 2 oyster subcommittees. And cool. I'm on Finfish because I still, do a lot of fin fishing recreationally and commercially.
Very cool. And the chair of the Finfish Management Committee is Mr. Jeff Deem, correct?
That was his last night.
Okay.
Yes, and he's been there he's been the chair for probably at least 15 years. Wow. And actually last night was his last night as chair. And so Ernie Bowden, who's a commercial fisherman from Chincoteague, who's been the chair before, he's no stranger, been in it as long. He's been active and been on boards longer than I have, big time. And I think he was actually a commissioner. Yeah, he's been he's been a commissioner before.
Okay.
So he's now, and then there's a vice chair, and the vice chair is actually Will Bransom. So you got, and he's recreational representative, more or less. That's why he's there. So but yeah, but Jeff Deem's done a great job over the years. So new chairman now.
It's just great to kind of understand the framework of how this organization is put together and how that co-op works with the VMRC, and then kind of, unpacking it backwards. Where does public opinion come in? That's where participation is so important for guys like us, the recreational guys or the charter guys or the commercial guys, to show up and be able to learn, the why behind decision making, and then offer opinions if need be. So there's a
Yeah.
person who is deputy chief of the VMRC, and if I understand correctly, she is the kind of lead representative from VMRC who's there to help coordinate and conduct these meetings. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less. That's a good way to describe her. Yep, that's right.
Okay.
That position, because it's been other, it's been men and women both in that position, and currently Shanna. Yep, that's
Yep.
exactly right.
Yep. Miss Shannon Madison. And I got to say, I asked her last night, I said, what was your passion for getting involved in this? And she said, I had a love for marine biology. That's what I studied in college. And then, I've worked at the, I think it's the MFC, and now she's doing this at the VMRC. And she just said, I just love all things marine biology. And so this is an opportunity for me to, work and do my passion and give
Yeah,
back. And so it was neat for me to see that it was a young person, and it was a woman, and she was really passionate about it. So that gave me
yeah,
some comfort and assurance that decision making is around somebody who truly has a passion for it, and it's not just a job. And you and I were talking before we hit record, and you said there was some things that she really fought for
yeah,
the recreational fishermen. Could you kind of dive into that a little
yeah.
bit? What was she working on behind the scenes?
Yeah, first off, too, let's talk. We talked about the structure of the subcommittee
Hmm.
in relationship to the Marine Resources Commission, but something it's important for your viewers to know also is that the full time staff like Shanna, they do double duty, and as well us volunteers. We serve on committees for ASMFC, for the Mid Atlantic Council, for South Atlantic. I'm on a committee South Atlantic for cobia and Spanish mackerel.
Okay.
I do that in addition to the state level stuff. And so Shanna was our representative at ASMFC for this cobia meeting, this cobia decision. So they not only do their 40-hour week over there in Hampton at the offices, but then they're sent out of town to ASMFC, Mid Atlantic Council, some, NOAA,
Hmm.
different meetings to gather information, keep their finger on the pulse for Virginians, and for the VMRC. And then they come back and bring, in Shanna's case, she was actually a voting member at the ASMFC, that did work on what she brought home that we voted on last night.
Okay, very cool. And so the ASMFC stands for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And
Yes,
how
sir.
does that organization fit in with the VMRC? What's that
Well,
connection?
and it was voted on by Congress, very controversial about 10 years ago. That organization is the 13 member states on the entire Atlantic coast,
Okay.
thus the name. And at one time, they provided recommendations. Now they provide mandates. What they say goes.
Okay.
And that's the big change from 10 years ago. And a lot of us, and I'll tell you, I wasn't a big fan of it. But now, and I'm still not, but we'll save that for another show. But what they say goes. When
Okay.
they hand us reductions, like they're getting ready to do in December, we'll save that for another show, striped bass.
Yep.
But when they have technical committees and they have other committees and they hash out the science and they say, hey, we got to make changes, and they say to different states, Virginia, hey, you got to make this change. We have to make the change. If we go out of compliance, the federal government can shut us down. In other words,
Uh,
if we go out of compliance on a species, they can step in and say, guess what? You don't have a season for that species at all.
got it.
So
So,
so they are our big brother.
and so FinFish and the subcommittees that work
Yep.
on these, hashing these things out, then they
Yep.
make recommendations to the VMRC, who then votes on things. And then does the VMRC then take those to AFMFC?
No,
Or
they've already
no?
been. It came from ASMFC. We
Got it.
just adopt it. They give us a slate of options, like she
Hmm.
did last night,
Yep.
and we're pretty much limited to that. The ASMFC has already given us what they pretty much mandate. Here are your choices. Sometimes
Okay.
they're narrow in scope, and sometimes
Got
they're
it.
broad. Last night I would call that medium. Well, our choices were in as far as how many in the past I've seen the past 30 years. I've seen some choices that were as narrow as two. And then
Right.
I've seen some choices that they gave us a ton of choices, as much as 20, with
Hmm.
seasons and closures and bag limits and size limits. Last night was a fairly manageable, group of four choices, basically.
Got it. That
But
makes sense. So,
that comes from ASMFC.
got
Then
it.
we just have to pick our poison, how we're basically what they told us was 16%.
Got
And
it.
then
And then you figure it out. Figure
yeah,
out the
how do we
best
achieve the
solution.
16? Yeah.
Right, right.
16% reduction is what we were looking at last night.
Got it.
The
Got it.
minimum. We could do more.
Right.
We're going to talk about that, or
Yeah.
we couldn't do less though.
Got it. Okay.
We're
And
not
so
allowed. That was
the
yes, and yeah,
the big change that they did in terms of the addendum 2 that was passed was, instead of looking us as individual states, they broke us up into 2 regions. So can you speak to that a little bit? What's that change look like from a geography perspective?
yeah. It basically took and put Virginia. It took from Virginia north, because we have such a huge catch. They took our catch, our history, and combined it with states that have really little catch.
Got
Then
it.
they took, basically North Carolina, Georgia, or North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and put them in a block and said, their, catch is about the same as this other region that Virginia's in.
Right.
Virginia accounts for a huge share of the total catch on the coast.
Yeah,
So
I'm
they
looking at
put us
those
with,
numbers right now, and what you said is exactly what we saw last night, which is the
yep,
southern region, North Carolina down through Georgia.
yep,
The recreational harvest target was pretty much right on par with what the 21 through 23 recreational harvest was. So the difference is effectively nothing. In fact, theirs was technically a little under the target. So the management change was status quo, do nothing. And then we in Virginia, we exceeded the average recreational target according to their data from
yep,
2021 to 2023 by nearly double. And so we would have been facing a 49% reduction. But if I'm understanding you and this addendum correctly, by grouping us in from
yeah.
Virginia to Rhode Island, we became part of that total pie of harvest target, which then left us with a 15.9% reduction need instead of a 49% reduction need.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
right. Yep.
Which that was all Shanna, correct?
Yes.
And
Yep.
had she not fought for us, we'd be facing, you get to keep a half a cobia today, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Half a season.
Yeah.
Half of the season as we know it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And you used the term de minimis states. Can you explain that?
Yeah. De minimis means, that they have such a little catch that they almost have no impact. They almost have no impact. And so the cumulative catch of, say, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland, might equal a quarter of Virginia's catch. But de minimis states are so small that they really don't get, they don't have to abide by any hard reductions.
Got
Because
it.
they just catch so few.
Right.
Um,
And
you
currently, those northern states, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, they've been operating on a all year long season of one fish, minimum length 37 inches.
I believe so. That
Yeah.
sounds about right. I don't. I wish I had it exactly, but yeah,
I'm looking at the
yeah,
slides from last night. And
very good. Good job. Yeah,
so they would be the ones actually seeing a considerable improvement in a sense that the new things that we're looking at are actually going to somewhat increase their bag limit while dramatically changing their minimum size from 37 inches to what it is proposed to be. So let's dive into that. So there were several methods for the new measures. I am not a scientist, but we ended up with 4 options to look at. And so I want to understand from your perspective, what is it that we, as the recreational fishermen, who I understood from Shanna last night, we make up 96% of the total harvest,
Mhm.
recreational guys.
Yep.
So the onus is on us really to be stewards of the fishery and be mindful of our harvest practices.
Yeah.
Talk to that a little bit. What are we don't want to come down on anyone, but the idea is what is the right attitude to have towards recreational fishing, specifically for cobia when you go out
Well,
there?
it's an ownership thing, and there's another species that in Virginia you could probably put in that as well, and that's sheep's head.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with that now, but those are 2 species that people really need to, and the data's there. I mean, there's just no arguing it that those 2 species are hands down. The majority of the catch is recreational. In other words,
Yeah.
the removals. So these are, I want to start using terms so people can get used to hearing them.
Yeah.
Removals are what we call catch, when things are caught, killed, and
Hmm.
eaten. So removals, total removals in Virginia on cobia are credited to recreational fishing.
Got it.
Period. 96% of the removals.
Got it.
So any problems that come from over harvest are a recreational cause problem. I mean, it just is.
Yeah.
There's very few. We have the same limits in
Hmm.
commercial. There's less people doing it. They're caught mainly as a bycatch, and I don't want to get into this, but pound nets catch a few. There is a directed commercial hook and line fishery. I'd be curious of what that catch is, but it's very minimal. But so yeah, we got to talk about that and just say, hey, let's accept that. And now with that knowledge, we bear a big responsibility. I say recreational,
Hmm.
I'm speaking for you guys, and say, hey, what can we do?
Yeah.
What's our responsibility here?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And even thinking about like a hunting analogy, I've been on a buddy of mine, Butch Theory's, property to go hunting, and he's like, "Hey, we don't shoot these, we don't shoot these, we only shoot these." And they really preserve their stock so that there's always a bounty, but then you're able to have those, really cool encounters with some trophies. But if you're out there just shooting everything that walked, you'd have nothing left.
Great
Um,
analogy. Yeah.
Almost liken it to like this summer, we started growing tomatoes here at my house, and it was a labor of love, moving them in and out of the sun, all this and the other. And if every time I decided I'm hungry, I went out and ate 17 tomatoes, there'd be nothing left. It'd
Yeah.
decimate them. So we just got to be
Lazy.
responsible. And what's the term that the Bible uses is a season and a time for everything in moderation as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
so let's talk about the four options that we had. So one option was status quo, which is the current 40 inches, but there wasn't really any indication what percentage of reduction that would have because the current status quo, we've somewhat exceeded our
Yeah.
removal. The second option was moving to a one fish bag, 40-inch
Mhm.
minimum, and then there were some options for an abbreviated season, or excuse me, a slightly extended season, June 8th through September 15th, or June 15th through September 22nd. Now, you guys didn't really seem too favorable on that one. I'm just curious, what was some of the initial thoughts as to why that one in particular wasn't a favorable option?
And I've got to tell you, this is where I'm going to be a poor visitor to your show. I didn't have a big I tried not to be a decision maker here
Got it.
because I'm not I don't do as much recreational fishing as other people in the room. I didn't abstain. I was part of the discussion. I still want to. I still have things to offer, but I didn't really weigh in on any of the options only because it's not. I don't have as much stake in the game as other people there.
No, that
Um,
that that makes sense. So
yeah,
maybe zooming out a little bit when we talk about the effort, that is referring to whatever practices we put into place or whatever changes to the regulations we make. That is our effort
yeah,
in being more in alignment with the soft target for the total harvest. Is that correct?
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, effort is just, the amount of pressure, and the only way to regulate effort is through seasons.
got
Okay.
it.
Yeah,
Got it.
effort is to my knowledge, and we're just, talking general scope here,
Hmm.
but effort is you can reduce effort through seasons.
Yeah.
Now you can reduce mortality through bag limits,
Right.
and then size limits, you're also reducing the number of fish caught because obviously some are thrown back. So
Right.
I hope I answered your question.
You
You
did.
have to tell me that. I think I can tell you what the flavor was. What was that particular option? Was
It
that
was
option you just
it was
mentioned?
a one fish bag, 40 inches
Mhm.
minimum, and then
Mhm.
that was a slightly extended season option of June
Oh,
8th through
I
the
can tell you
15th.
why.
Yeah.
It was the charter guys. And I one fish bag, a one fish per vessel is not
Yeah, you
uh
can't run a business off that.
no, it's not palatable to paying customers. It's
Right.
just not. You're splitting a one fish between six guys, and at
Yeah.
least four guys on some of the smaller center consoles, charter guys. They're carrying four. Some of your
Hmm.
bigger boats are carrying six.
Right.
You're going to split one fish between six people.
Right.
So it's hard to pay $850 for
And
one
and
fish.
get one fish. Yeah, you get
Yeah,
seven tacos. Have a nice day.
yeah,
And it might be helpful to kind of paint a picture around the adjustment from June 1st to June 15th. If you just look at it, it's like, oh, we're just taking away 15 days, but it's 15 specific days. And what's the why
yeah.
behind those first
Okay.
15 days
So
of June?
all right. So for your listeners and viewers, let's throw some more vocabulary. Conservation equivalency.
Okay.
Okay. So a conservation equivalent is, well, how much percentage of reduction do you get reducing these days? So, in other words, if you took away 5 days in June, you would get as much credit as if you took away 2 weeks in September. You
Ah,
see?
Yep.
because there's more success. There's more angler success in June than there is in September. Now, I know there's people, your lures listeners are going to argue that.
Yeah.
The bottom line is it's not success, but the amount of fish, I should correct it. The amount of fish killed in June versus September, there's more killed in June days than September days because people go back to school, they go
Yeah.
back to work, there's
Yep.
less charters, there's just less people fishing in September than June. So that's
Yeah.
why those days, the June days, have a higher value in conservation equivalency. If you really want to conserve a fish, a cobia fish, you cut days out of June, you're getting more bang for your buck than cutting days out of September.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And
Did I
and
answer
there's
that question?
you did fantastically. And in addition to the conservation equivalency, did I get that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Is the fact that those early June fish are coming in pre-spawn, ready to go and spawn. And if we, harvest and remove a lot of those fish that are ready to spawn, we impact negatively the reproduction rates.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure the technical committee gets that. They're actually looking. I think that's more of a common sense and a moral and ethical thing.
Right.
But I think they're just looking at total removals.
Hmm.
The size limit is where that comes in. How many big spawners? That's your size limit stuff, and
Yeah.
that. So I don't mean to correct you, but you and I know those days are valuable because it's pre-spawn fish. But I'll have to say I have to check, but I don't think the technical committee looks
Goes
at that.
that deep. Yeah.
No, they don't deep that. It's all about removals,
Yeah.
numbers.
And I would
How
say
many?
though that the common sense
You're
in that
right.
we see them bloated, we know they're full of
Oh,
eggs, they're ready to
absolutely.
rock,
Oh no.
and they tend to be a little bit more less
Yeah,
bait shy. Early June, they're hungry, they're ready to
yeah,
eat. Mid July, different
sure.
story.
Yeah,
So
and we're
back to
going to
that.
talk about that responsibility thing later. But yeah, the common sense tells you, those bigger spawners are, more valuable to the resource.
Absolutely. So the next option we had was 41-inch minimum, so a 1 inch increase in the minimum length, and then two fish with a shorter season option of June 15th through August 31st or June 27th through September 15th. And that was proposing roughly a 17.5 to 17.1% reduction. What was the kind of
See,
thoughts around
see,
that one?
See there, they what they did there. They gave you another fish,
Hmm.
but they threw in a 2 inch. Now we've lost. We're throwing more fish back because
Yep.
we went up 2 inches, and we gave up some season.
Yep.
So these are how we're trading those conservation equivalencies. See how the
Back and
chess
forth.
game has happened?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a math problem almost. Like you
it is.
pull this in and out of the equation, and you end up with this percentage. And so it's like, what
Yep,
equation is the least abrasive to the recreational enjoyment,
yep,
and still providing a viability to the charter guides while also achieving the percentage. And then we
yep.
basically had the same option with increasing it to 42 inches with the same season adjustment, and that one was going to 20%, which would be 4% over what was suggested. So I'm assuming just based on that increase in the effort, you guys said, no, that's not necessary.
Yeah, and we didn't want to give them, and then we'll talk about this in a minute. We didn't really want to go over the requirement was 16%. We want to
Right.
stay as close to that as possible because you don't get credit if you go over 3 years from now. You're not going to get credit for that.
Right. Like if we reduced by 25% when we only needed to reduce 16%, you're not going to get credit for the 25%. You're only going to get credit for what you needed to achieve. And then
That's
there was
correct.
another factor I remember Shanna talking about, which is now that we are grouped into regions, we knew that these are a highly pelagic or migratory species. So the more northern states, they don't see those fish for a period of time. So we had to be mindful of the season length that we
Mhm.
chose so that they had some opportunity later in the season, whereas we're seeing them early June, late May,
Yes,
and they may not see them until July
July
or
4th.
August. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah,
So
that's correct.
so that leads us into the option that, the Finfish Committee voted on unanimously and recommended to the VMRC, which was we had a 43-inch minimum option, two fish, and there was two date ranges, June 15th through September 20th, which is what we're used to, which would have given us a 20%, that in a sense too much effort, or through the 20th of September, which put us right at that 16.3% mark, which was right there at what we needed to be. So what was the reason that you guys were like, "Hey, this works, thumbs up"?
On the last one, the one we chose.
Yeah.
Well, when we put it out to public comment, there really wasn't much on any of the choices. So when we saw heads nodding in the affirmative, I think there was some texting.
Yeah.
There's always some texting, from people at home to the representatives of Finfish potentially.
Mm-hmm.
The people, audience members. I think we felt that the pulse of the room, that was it. It felt right. It looked like it. And plus, we went on our past experience of not giving too much and not getting credit for it. We've done that in the past, and I want to say it was the early 2000s when the cobia fishing just exploded, and it was 2 fish per person. There was no boat
Wow.
limit. There was no boat limit. And
Can
I'm
you
not even going to tell
imagine?
you what it was in 95. We're not going to go into that. But I can tell you in the early 2000s, it was 2 fish per person. Virginia voluntarily went to a 1 fish per person. And it was a very controversial because there were a lot of people who fished just with their buddy, 2 people, and they were aggravated.
Right.
They, hey, you're killing us, and so ultimately, went to a 4 per boat, I think it was. And we
Yeah.
did that voluntarily. And that's what really bit us, because the effort kept going up. They would keep hitting the resource. And then they came back and said, hey, you got to do more. And we'd already done more when they asked us to do just a basic level.
Yeah.
And so we didn't get credit for it. And so we really got to be careful of that. And some people say, we're doing what's right shouldn't matter. You shouldn't. Well, it does. And
Yeah.
when you've done this as long as I have, and Zach Hoffman's seen this, Captain Zach, I put him on the spot, social media too. It was good to see him, but he's seen this happen. And what we don't want is do too much at the wrong time and not get credit for it later. Gosh, I know that just must sound horrible to some viewers that, just desperately want to do as much as they can for the fishery. And I understand that. And that's what we're going to talk about before this is over is, what can we do voluntarily and what's our responsibility? But as fisheries managers and as somebody that's been involved in this for a long time, I don't, the crunchers, the technical committee, the scientists, they don't get it. All they see is black and white. They don't understand. They just see black and white numbers.
Right.
They're going to base, if our catch doesn't, if we don't achieve the 16% goal in, I think it was, they're saying 5 years, we're going to have to come back to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal should be to do what they told us to do, see how it works, and then adjust it again later.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if we know there's things we can do to help, we should do that voluntarily. Okay.
Agreed.
And that's where we need to talk about, 1 fish per boat cobia tournaments, bringing 1 fish to the dock.
Yeah. Especially
Voluntarily.
with this new regulation, if I'm understanding correctly, we've eliminated the 1/50-inch
That's correct.
policy.
If
So that's a huge change.
Yeah,
considering
remember
what
now, the commission has got to vote on our what we decided last night.
Right.
Our recommendations. We provided a recommendation to the VMRC, but once they do vote it, then yes, it's very possible that next year it'll be 2 fish over 50,
Yep.
which will be allowed. And again, that comes with a great responsibility, and we're hoping people do the right thing and just do one. But we had to leave that in place because we don't want to dig too deep into the reduction when we're not required to, because we won't get credit for it later.
Right. That makes sense. And those actual votes will happen, I believe, sometime in February or March, where it actually will be passed by the VMRC and become.
I'd be surprised. I think it'll be next month.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This issue will be next month.
Okay.
Some of the other species we talked about last night will be later.
Mm-hmm.
But we've done our job last night. We had a motion. We voted on it. It was fairly unanimous, I think.
It was, yeah. 13 for 13.
So it'll be December. The cobia decision will be voted on in December, and it will go into effect then January 1.
Yep. And so just to be very specific, we selected last night as the recommendation June 15th through September 20th, which is 5 more days, and a 43-inch minimum, 2 fish bag. It just has to be 43 inches. You could have, in theory, you could have 2 60-inchers. That's certainly not the recommendation. That's what leads into this next part of the conversation. I do want to pause and point at something else in the addendum, which is important as a change, and that is that their recommendation scope for time adjusted where they can now make these changes for up to 5 years at a time, whereas prior it was 3 years. So something like this could be decided and put into effect for a period of 5 years.
That's correct.
Got it.
Yep. And the other thing that's important that we really haven't touched on here is that 3 inches in
Mhm.
size length. And it's amazing when you look at the data and the technical committee, and for every inch in minimum size you go up, how many fish you save. And I
Oh,
think that's
wow.
important for your listeners to understand. And we really, up to this point, have not given it enough credit as a tool. Remember our tools. Our
Hmm.
tools are season length. Our tools are size length, and the other tools are bag limits. Those are
Yep.
3 tools. And so that tool we use there, go from 40 inch to 3 inch, is a good chunk of the savings we achieved.
Right. That makes sense. Getting that 16%.
Yes.
Think about how many 40, 41, and 42 and
Yeah.
42 and a half inch fish that we've harvested. That's a lot.
Yes. That's the biggest part of our percentage came from that 3 inches.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, maybe the new tournament thing will be who can catch the heaviest fish closest to 43 inches. I'm just kidding.
Hey, what I mean, look, let's get creative.
Yeah.
Hey, look, we're out there to have fun. Does it always have to be, you know, maybe it's not the biggest. Maybe you're right. I mean, look at we do for the y'all's puppy drum tournaments. Spots. There's a number of spots
Yep.
award. I don't know. Yeah, I'll let y'all work that out. But
Well, I am
you know,
excited, and I'm putting one of our newest sponsors on the spot here, but he said it. Casey Davidson with Toadfish Gear wants to sponsor some sort of an award for a largest toadfish category in these future cobia tournaments, because of course toadfish they give 10% of their money back to reseeding
oh yeah,
oyster beds, and that's a huge conservation effort. But this is great to understand more of the why, because a lot of times we see these changes, and just because we're humans and we see change, we immediately buck against it and
yep.
get frustrated or upset. So it's been really beneficial, for me, and I hope for our listeners to begin to understand the process, the responsibilities, who's doing what, how it works together, how we can play a part both on getting involved with the public opinions and the voting processes. But if I'm hearing you correctly, the most important thing we can do is understand how the effort is applied, and that being the actual adjustments to the fisheries and the things that we do in our recreational harvest practices, and take that seriously. So, what does that look like for me as a recreational angler going into season 2025? What are things that it should be top of my mind when I go out cobia fishing?
Well, I'll tell you what we've done in the commercial world, and we've been required to, and it's also happening in some of your offshore fisheries, pelagic fisheries. One thing you could do is go to not move away from stainless hooks. Move away from
Ah,
stainless. The common steel, carbon steel sharpens on the boat quicker. You can sharpen between fish. It rusts out. If fish are gut hooked, cut it off, as close to the mouth and leave it, even if it is stainless. I was really nice talking to Captain Perez last night because he was telling me about a fish that he caught, and it was deeply hooked, and he decided to cut it off and leave it. Interestingly enough, the fish was speared 10 days later and killed recreationally. And he called the guy and found him, hunted him down, and asked him, "Hey, did you see any signs of that jig head?" And the guy said no. And we cleaned it, and we went through its stomach contents. They basically dissected it out of their own curiosity,
oh, wow.
full of bunker.
Yeah.
Menhaden for
Yeah.
your viewers who are interested. This was a late July fish. But it was interesting because that really got my attention. I overheard him talking to another recreational guy. But but anyways, is rust hooks that rust. We've proven that in the flounder fishery big time. I mean, the
Yeah.
jury is out, the verdict is in. Hooks that rust out, and the fish lives.
I can tell you, I saw a picture from Captain Eric Myers of the Heads and Tails that he sent me of a puppy drum that had one of those red jig heads with the stainless steel hooks sticking out of its butt,
Yeah,
still fully intact. So I guess it had consumed it. It somehow had tried to digest it and then excrete it, and that
couldn't
thing was
pass
still
it.
couldn't pass it.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. So no stainless hooks. What else? I'm heading out there.
Circle hooks. It's a tough one. It's a hard
Yeah,
one, but
yeah.
we're doing that in sailfish. We're doing that in marlin fishing. We're doing that obviously in commercial, fishing, longline. So, hey, why not give it a try? Especially if you're, hey, look, if you're in that top 10% or top 5% of anglers, if you're fortunate enough, you know, I I liken cobia fishing to deer hunting. It's like, when June 1st rolls around, or excuse me, June 15th, it's like a bunch of, orange caps. Everybody's so excited.
Yeah.
And I remember I had that excitement at one time about cobia, and I've caught my share, and so what I tell people is, that excitement, but there's a 5%. They say 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish. What I would tell to the top tier
Yeah.
people, experiment with some of that stuff. You're already a high success rate, fisherman. Try circle hooks. Why not try them?
Yeah, to take on a new adventure, and I would
Challenge.
say, especially, and I know I've talked to Captain Kenny Mills about this, and others that, if you're jig fishing or using an artificial, that your likelihood, of a gut hook fish is considerably less, and so they, especially not in the harvest season, they only throw artificials to ensure that they're not harming the fish.
Yeah,
But for those of us that are throwing like live eels or live finfish, where a lot of times you're letting that bait disappear and then you're waiting for them to eat, a circle hook
yeah,
there is definitely going to be the best option to, you know, not
yeah.
gut hook a fish that you don't intend to kill. So
And,
that's a great tip.
and if you're not using, yeah, if you're not using circles, go with carbon steel. Yeah.
got it. And then anything else that you can think of for us as we head out to 2025 to be better stewards of the fishery?
Oh yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, just voluntarily, voluntarily stick with that one fish over 50. You
Yeah.
know, make it a challenge. I don't know if you make a bumper sticker like release over 20,
Yeah.
one fish over 50.
Yeah.
Stay with that. And even though you don't have to, we kept that option there. Believe it or not, that's leverage. That's bargaining power for us in 5 years, is why we did that. It's
Yeah.
bargaining power at the federal level, but doesn't mean we can't do the right thing in the meantime.
Yeah.
I would say get creative with the tournaments. I think they're already doing, only one fish weighed, type tournaments. That's good. There's just no need to, and maybe look at minimum size, you like, right. Big Rock, the Big Rock Marlin tournament, is a minimum. You can't come to the dock with anything less than, I think it's
Now
300
that's a great
pounds.
idea right there. Yeah, to create a
Yeah.
minimum
Yeah.
length. Like if you're gonna weigh a fish, it has to be at least whatever,
Yeah.
48 inches, and you can only bring one or whatever the case. That way we don't, end up
Yeah.
with a whole bunch of,
Yeah.
22, 24-pound fish that don't need to be killed because they're not going to be worth any money anyways. And then, what you were just saying, it's like we need to coin the same, release over 20 became wildly popular for speckled trout, so for Kobe, it could just translate to release over 50. That we kind of start to have that mantra in our minds that
Yeah.
we do not need to kill two fish over 50 inches in a given day. That's just kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
And plus I've said this before too, and talked to folks about it. A 44-inch, 43-inch cobia, in my opinion, cleans and eats remarkably better than one of those bigger fish.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, yeah, you can sell it. There's so many ways to sell it,
Yeah, takes less ice to keep them cold. It's
Yeah.
easier to clean on the fillet table.
Yeah.
You name it. Uh,
Absolutely. There's so
yeah,
many ways, and and we've got other meat fish that are really right now. I mean, we won't get into it, but Spanish bluefish. I mean, there's other ways to fill that space in the cooler, to get something to take home,
yeah, absolutely.
But again, and I want to say, I don't want to get too deep into this because I am primarily a commercial fisherman, and I feel awkward. I feel out of place, and I don't want your viewers, who is this guy, preaching to us, you know. You're asking, so I'm telling people who
Yeah.
know me know my background. I've done it. I was a charter captain for years. I still have my license, but again, I don't want to get on my high horse too much, because it just ultimately becomes, oh, who's this commercial fisherman preaching to us?
Right.
So anyway,
Well, it's been incredibly beneficial to me. And, I look at you as somebody who, whenever we look at things that we need to trust, like there's a lot of stuff in the world we can't trust. There's a lot of sources of information that are not true. But whenever you see, and I've had a very wise businessman tell me this once, whenever something has proven itself over time, that's when you can begin to trust it. And I know your career and your story and your history. You've lived and bred this local saltwater for the most of your adult life, and you've got the time to show that, hey, you're probably somebody that we should tune our ear to when you're giving recommendations because you've had the time in there to see what happens. And so I appreciate very much your time and coming on and talking to us and having this conversation so that we can understand a little bit more about the framework of the decision making process and learn from a great source of recommendations of what we can do as recreational, that 96% of the harvest,
yep.
in our practices to make sure that this great fishery stays around for generations to come.
Yeah, and I want to, before I leave here, mention a couple. We mentioned Zach Hoffman, but some other guys, that have been involved in this for a long time. A real legend, Neil Taylor,
Hmm.
is a captain. His name is Chris. I'm looking up his number right now. Gosh, he's been involved in this a long time too. Chris Martin,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
man, Chris goes way back.
Oh yeah.
Those guys,
Meat man
yeah,
Martin.
good fisherman, but he's been involved in this stuff too at the committee level.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously Zach, we've mentioned him a couple of times, but they deserve some credit because they've been.
Activating activist for it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it is not. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's contentious,
Hmm.
and you know, gosh, last night was a real pleasure. I mean, it went well as
Oh yeah.
well, at least on that species.
Yeah.
So
Which who knows? It could have gone another way. So
yeah,
I think we have our marching orders, which is, hey guys, let's release over 50. Let's be good
yeah,
stewards. Let's not take more than we need. And let's look at it as the valuable resource that it is and show it the respect that it deserves. And I think if we all do that collectively, we can anticipate having this great thing to enjoy the sport of it for years to come.
absolutely, excellent.
Awesome. Well, Captain Chris, thank you so much for being on the show again. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, appreciate you being at the meeting. It was really nice seeing you guys there. Yep.
Absolutely. It was a great learning experience. So, folks, that's going to wrap up this really cool, informative segment talking about all things cobia regulations. Y'all stick around for a word for our sponsors, and we'll be back with you soon. Do you want to make a difference in your waterways? Toadfish is the only brand that cleans coastal waters with every purchase. Having already planted almost 300,000 square feet of oyster habitat, Toadfish is leading the charge in conservation with thoughtfully designed, eco-friendly products and a mission to protect the waters that we call home. Visit gdo.deals/toadfish and 15% off will be applied to your cart at checkout. Toadfish, let's put them back. Hilton's offshore charts. The days of heading out and blindly looking for good fishing areas are pretty much over. Don't waste time and money on fuel searching for fish. You need the most recent, highest resolution images to not only know where to go, but where not to go. The knowledge provided by today's technology is critical when planning an offshore fishing trip. So make the choice that professional captains all over the East Coast make and choose Hilton's Real-Time Navigator. The easy-to-use interface and excellent customer service will have you on the fish every time you go. Check them out at hiltonsoffshore.com. That's hiltonsoffshore.com. All right, y'all. Well, welcome to this segment. I'm actually excited to bring someone back that we haven't spoken to in a little while. I'm impressed that he's still out there fishing. Granted, it hasn't gotten really, really cold yet, but Mr. Brian Lockwood, or better known as Jet Ski Brian, welcome back to the show, man. How you doing?
Oh, great, Luke. Thanks again for having me. And yeah, I've been staying busy fishing and good to be on your show again. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Talking about weather changing and temperatures changing, how do you do it when it gets downright cold out there on that jet ski?
Well, luckily, over the years, I kind of learned what works best for me as it gets colder. And the difficult thing about this time of year, whether it's spring or fall, is it usually starts out cool in the morning and it could be up to 70 in the afternoon. So it might be 35, 40, 45 when I leave and 70 when I come back. So I kind of layer up so that while I'm out there, I can be warm when I leave, and I can take off a couple layers as the day goes, and not be as hot, because that's the worst part when you're out there and you just got too much on and you're cooking. So I usually this time of year just wear regular pants and a rain suit, a good rain suit over that, and then my life jacket when it's not too bad in the 60s and 70s, and then later in the season and when it starts to get cold, I'll wear my street clothes, I call it, and a Mustang survival suit over top of that. But I also bring a life jacket with me because sometimes I've started out the day with a survival suit and I just get way too hot. But I can at least peel that off and still put on a life jacket, because when you're on a PWC, even if you're idling or just fishing or anchored, you have to have a PFD on the whole time. My survival suit classifies as a PFD, but if I take it off, I have to have a life jacket to put on, so I have something on. So I do layers and different things, and when it gets real cold in the winter, December, January, February, I'll still be out looking for togs and looking at whales, and I wear a dry suit underneath of my survival suit, because the survival suit is only rated, they say, for 40-degree water, but the dry suit, I'll theoretically live a little bit longer if I end up in the water.
Put it this way, that is some serious gear and thoughtful preparation. I mean, I had to look because I was curious, what a Mustang survival suit cost, and that's no small investment either. But I mean, I'm sure, your lovely wife and those that love you as a friend or family member are very grateful that you are that intentional about making sure that you stay alive when you're out there on that jet ski, especially in these colder temperatures when, the circumstances change dramatically if you go in the water when it's 84-degree water versus 64 or 54-degree water. So those that maybe have never heard your voice before, just brief recap. Where did you get the name Jet Ski Brian from, and why is that your nickname?
Probably because I fish my jet ski, but the original reason is years ago. There's a local celebrity here, Captain Reese, who had a fishing radio show on AM 7090 for many, many years, and I used to call into him every now and then and just talk about what I've been doing fishing wise on my jet ski. And he would talk to quite a few people over the years. And one of the guys out there, he still fishes, is Kayak Kevin Whitley. He used to call into Captain Reese's show all the time. So after I had called in a couple times, Captain Reese said, "Hey, I'm going to start calling you Jet Ski Brian. We got Kayak Kevin. I'm going to call you Jet Ski Brian." So that's kind of how that started. He kind of pinned that name on me.
That's awesome. And I got to say, it's funny, several times this summer fishing, I thought I was seeing you and I was like, "Hey, Brian." And then, turn around and it's not you. It's just another guy on a jet ski because there's not a ton of them out there. So I just kind of naturally assumed if there's a guy on a jet ski fishing that it must be you, but I'm seeing a few more here and there. So let's dive in. So it is, unseasonably warm, like we were talking about before we hit the record button, but for you, in terms of what you've been doing lately, what have you been targeting, and tell me about a couple of your last couple fishing trips.
Yeah, definitely. This time of year, now that the water is finally slowly cooling down, I mean, it's been really warm. I looked back the last couple of years, but give an example. Last year, this time when I was striped bass fishing in the bay and the James River, the water temperature was like 54, 55 degrees. And this last week, I fished a couple times in the James, and it's been 65 and 66 degrees. So that's a big difference, almost 10 degrees warmer this year. And I was worried about it really slowing down the striped bass bite because I don't think the fish have moved around as much. But I did this last week fished the James River 3 times, one time in a tournament, and I got varied results in that 1 week. I one day fished up by the mothball fleet off of Fort Eustis and caught 13 striped bass up to 34 inches and 6 catfish. And the next day I fished the James River Bridge and caught nothing. So it varies and it's not just the warm water, but one day is different from the next, every time you fish. And
Right.
the last Saturday I fished in the 24th James River striped bass tournament. And I've done that tournament for quite a few years, maybe 12 years, I guess. And I won that tournament last year, and I won it 10 years ago. And I've also placed second and third in that same 10-year time frame. This year, the rules changed a little bit. It used to be always just a one-fish weigh-in for that tournament. The biggest fish wins.
Right.
And this year, with the new striped bass regulations, they felt, hey, you can only keep up to a 24-inch fish. It's not as exciting for the tournament, so they decided to change the rules and let it be a 2-fish weigh-in, which is fine if you're on a boat with a couple other people. But in my case, I'm one person on a jet ski, and I can only keep 1 fish. Versus if there's 4 guys on the boat, they keep 4 fish and choose their 2 largest up to 24 inches fish.
I see.
So it made it a little bit more difficult for me. But at the same time, they also added a new category just to try and make it interesting. And National Extermination put in a big $1,000 so that whoever catches and releases the largest fish and documents it by photograph on a timestamped cell phone picture and sends that in, we'll give that person $1,000. So I decided to focus on trying to catch a bigger fish, not necessarily a slot keeper fish, because I only keep 1. So I was very fortunate. I eeled all day in a place that I fish every year. I fish the same probably 100-yard area, and I just stay there all day. and I was lucky and caught the largest striped bass for the tournament, and that was like 34 3/4 inches. So I got lucky. Even though I didn't win the tournament, I still won $1,000. I had a good day.
Hey, that is a good day. And that's a really cool, tournament based on what you're describing, but I see the limitation obviously there with, you being one guy on a jet ski, and it would probably be tough to have two guys sitting on the same jet ski. So it's good on you for winning
Yeah,
the length
I
category.
debated that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I debated that, but I mean, I love my friends and I love my brothers, but sitting on a jet ski with somebody else for 9 hours is a long time, and nobody really wanted to volunteer to do that, and I didn't ask. Yeah, so
I, I don't blame you,
yeah,
man. That would make for a very long day of, for lack of better terms, uh, somebody being big spoon and somebody being little spoon, which, yeah, would get uncomfortable after a while. So tell
yeah.
me,
New meaning for close friends. Yeah.
right? Yeah, we've got the terminology of tower love, which we won't go into, but those cobia fishermen out there that have small towers know exactly what I'm talking about. When you're in
Yeah,
very
yeah.
very close proximity with another person and the boat's wobbling around and whatnot. But so
True.
talking about some fishing techniques, obviously you're fishing from a PWC, a jet ski, but that doesn't mean that the fishing technique or the reasoning for getting located in a certain area would be any different than if you're on the boat or fishing from land. So when it comes to striped bass, you mentioned a lot about water temperature. You mentioned eeling. Talk me through some of the things that you take into consideration when you think about, okay, I'm going to go fishing on Saturday. It's Thursday. What are you looking at weather-wise, location-wise? Like, what are some of those factors that you consider in order to kind of start planning your fishing trip?
Yeah, you kind of covered it all. I look at all of those things, the temperature, the wind direction, the wind speed, and a lot of days blowing in the bay, and a lot of days it's 20 in the bay, but it might be 10 miles an hour in the James River. So this time of year, which overall through the whole year, I don't fish the James that much, but this time of year for striped bass, I do. So a lot of times it's not fishable in the bay, but I can be in the James River. And when I fished Saturday, there was an example. It was blowing 10 to 15 up in the James River, and it was blowing 20 to 25 in the bay. So even though it was a little bit choppy in the James, it was still fishable, and I wouldn't have gone in the bay because it was just too windy. So yeah, a lot of it really is the wind direction, the wind speed, and that kind of dictates a lot of times where I'm going to go. Same thing with the bay. A lot of times it's choppy and sloppy, but you want to fish the Bay Bridge. So I just suck it up and pound the waves and get out to the Bay Bridge and try and get in the lee side of the corner of the island. So if it's blowing out of the northwest, I might be able to fish behind or in the corner of this island. Or if it's the northeast, I'll fish on the opposite side. So it's the direction and the wind speed really dictate where I go. But if it's dead calm, then my options are all open and I can kind of, just pick and choose where I want to go. But a lot of times if it's sloppy, I'll still go out knowing if I get there, then I'll be nice. And then I just deal with it, the bad, a little choppy coming and going.
Right, right. And then in terms of, let's take a different kind of body of water, the James River, for example. I don't have a lot of experience up there. What kind of depth variations do we have up that way? And when it comes to targeting striped bass, in those waters, where do they typically tend to hang out? Is it shallow, deep?
It's a mixture of that, but literally, like I said, I fished that tournament 10, 12 years, and I go to the exact same 2 channel markers off the mothball fleet. And one reason why is because just in that stretch, one side of the channel is 35 feet, the other side of the channel of the channel marker on the opposite side is 9 feet. So on one side, there's this really big area of old oyster beds, and literally you can get hung up on some oysters there. And then the other side, it's not as much structure, but there's some structure. So I'm looking for variation in depth and structure, whether it's tog fishing or striped bass fishing. So I fish that same exact stretch because I know that there's some type of structure, not just a channel or a variation depth. The oyster beds help a lot. There's little rockfish up there. There's medium, big rockfish up there. So I fish, for me at least, that same area. Some people fish the James and they're looking for, bird activity, which that works as well too. But I'm looking for more the depth changes in structure. So I fish up off the mothball fleet where I know there's a big oyster bed area.
Okay. And so that, just to try to understand, like, why would a striper be in that area? So you talked about this big depth, change difference just off of that fleet, which, by the way, we'll get into in a second. I want to tell folks what that is.
Okay.
And then the oyster beds, what would you say is unique about an oyster bed that, see, whether it's speckled trout fishing, puppy drum fishing, it seems to be that there's always a connection between, if you're near an oyster bed, there just seems to be a higher likelihood that there's going to be some fish nearby. Why do you think that is?
I kind of have firsthand experience with that because I lived on the water for 20 years here in Pocosin, and my neighbor got me into raising oysters through aquaculture.
Hmm.
And we created a lot of oyster beds along our shoreline and made like an artificial reef out of oysters. And as time went on and we had oysters growing on that, it became a really good fishing area in front of my house because the oysters and the oyster beds are like a reef and it's structure. So all the little fish and little crabs and little worms are all embedded in that oyster bed. So it brings little fish to feed on the things, and then it gives big fish something to feed on, which is the little fish that are feeding on the little crabs and worms and stuff in that oyster bed. So it's just like a artificial reef or a natural reef. The
Hmm.
oyster beds act as a reef, so it attracts bait fish, which attracts other fish to those bait fish.
Got it. And then, of course, it attracts us humans to them because we love eating oysters. There's nothing better than them.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
or
Yeah, and
as
there's a there's a lot of oyster beds in the James River. A lot of people don't realize that. And on any given day, this time of year, you can see a dozen workboats up there, getting
oh
harvesting
yeah.
oysters.
Oh yeah, and one of our sponsors, Sam Russ Seafood. I worked there when I was a young kid, and I can't tell you the number of James River oysters that I packed in bags, for local restaurants to enjoy. And so, whether it's an Eastern Shore oyster or a James River oyster, where those oysters, and we're kind of nerding out here on a moment for aquaculture, but where those oysters are raised, has a lot to do with the end flavor profile in terms of like the salinity and the surroundings and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a neat thing to dive into, maybe for another day. But back to the ghost fleet. So tell the listeners, you said what did you say, mothball fleet? I think the technical term is like ghost fleet. Maybe tell us where did that come from?
Yes, it's a federal area. It's got a ready reserve fleet,
Hmm.
and years ago, after World War One and Two, they had all these ships left over and no war to have. So they said, well, let's put them up here and kind of keep them somewhat preserved in case we need these ships again someday. And
Hmm.
I read up on it not too long ago, and at one point there was 300 ships anchored off of Fort Eustis in the James River, and
Wow.
right now there's only 5.
Okay.
So they gradually, over many, many years. Now, 20 years ago, there was 100 boats there, ships there, and
Wow.
gradually, just every year, there's less and less because they've deteriorated and they've
Hmm.
become no longer able to be used. So they've gradually, over time, scrapped a lot of these ships. But it's still an area that you're not supposed to go around. But it's a phenomenal area to fish. Years ago, everybody would try and sneak up to the ships because the ships themselves acted as a reef, because you figure all these ships have been here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and are all covered in barnacles.
Oh
And it was
yeah.
really phenomenal fishing around the ships as well. But now, like I said, there is only 5 ships there at this point. So but yeah, it was a really cool sight to see many years ago. Now it's kind of like, why are these 4 ships here?
Oh wow, that is pretty cool. So I want to jump into some like terminal tackle and some bait here. There are some differences with requirements for striped bass this year. Is it true one of them is that there's a certain type of hook we need to be using? Is that correct?
Yes, for cobia and striped bass, you have to use a circle hook, and which is fine. I've been using circle hooks for years. Like everybody else, I used to always just use a J hook,
Hmm.
but to me, a circle hook works just as well. And yeah, and 90% of the time, it's hooked right in the corner of its mouth instead of swallowing the whole hook. So
Right,
it's
right.
better for catch and release fishing and all these bigger fish. If you're targeting them, in my case, I don't want it to swallow the hook because it's all catch and release for larger fish. So I
Hmm.
typically, if I'm eeling, like in the James River and sometimes in the bay,
Hmm.
I literally I'm dragging an eel on a 3-way, like almost like you're wire lining, but I'm using braid. So I
Hmm.
have a 8, 10 or 12 ounce sinker on a 3-way with an eel on a 6 or 7 aught hook, maybe on a 8 to 10 foot leader trailed behind on the eel. So I'm literally slow trolling along these edges and ledges with a rod in my hand, idling, trying to go a specific speed against or with the current, and just bouncing it off the bottom until I feel a strike. So that's one way of doing it. And for the James River, for that particular area, that's my favorite way of doing it. You know, there were several people up there in that tournament that were using planer boards and eels on planer boards, or slow trolling bucktails or small stretches. But for me to try and catch a bigger fish, I've done better with eels on the bottom for that particular area.
Got it. That makes sense. And just to be very specific about that hook, I was just reading up on it. So it's got to be an inline circle hook, not an offset. That's important to note as well for
Yes,
folks that are listening.
correct.
And then in terms of like, you know, if you see them on your, let's say that you're like looking around and maybe you locate some good water, maybe like a big depth change where there's like a big deep shipping channel, and then we've got like a low flat or a shallow flat nearby. And we've also identified some oyster bed, and we're kind of looking around the area and we start to see a few marks on our bottom machine. What do you typically do? Do you change anything different? Do you start trolling there? Do you start dropping there? Like, what's your strategy when you actually see good marks on your screen? What do you typically do in response?
I wait for a bite, and literally most of the time, like if the other day I could see fish marks on my finder, and of course my line is trailing behind my jet ski, maybe 5-10 feet. Then literally almost every time I had good marks, a moment later I'd have a good hit. Didn't
Nice.
always get a hook set, but I'd have a good hit. And the same thing with as the day progressed. Usually in the morning I'd have bigger marks halfway up. So if I'm in 20 feet of water, I'd have marks 10 feet up, and I wasn't getting any hits because I'm dragging on the bottom. But as the day progressed, for me at least, I saw better big fish marks on the bottom, and I would just go upstream and then drift back through where those marks were, and that's where I would get my hits on the striped bass. But yeah, so my eyes are on the depth finder and the sounder. The whole time I am slow trolling to see what I'm coming up and see what I'm crossing. And if I'd hit a couple taps and then didn't get a hit, I'd just circle back around and follow my trail right back into those marks, and often get a hit on the next pass.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, that's good information to know. And then in terms of like your depth that you're in, like I'm looking at some of the pictures you had. It looks like you were seeing some good marks in that 11, 12-foot range. And that's just good insight for those that are maybe new to this or looking to, explore it, that those are going to be some of those, depths that you're more likely to have some success in. And of course, this is just talking about the James from that, recent trip and out in the bay. I'm
Yes.
sure it's something totally different.
But it is similar because, like I said, it's like wire lining the third and fourth or first and second island in the rocks. I'm doing the same thing as a guy that's wire lining along the tubes. I'm in structure and I'm dropping my eel or bucktail, whatever, and I'm slow trolling along edges and ledges and structure. The only difference is in the James, I'm doing structure, which are oyster beds, and if I'm wire lining the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel along the tube, it's the same exact theory, just a different depth and a different type of structure.
Got it. That makes sense. Man, it's just cool to see how much you're able to do from a jet ski. I know I've struggled in the past from a boat and from, kayaks. And so it's just cool that you got that thing outfitted so well that you're able to be so successful. I got to give somebody a shout out here, and that is Captain CL Marshall with his joke about not competing for the largest fish per se, but rather the fish with the most spots. I enjoyed that comment very much.
Yeah, that's true. I saw that.
Yeah. So, any other tips, when it comes to the striped bass fishery around here? Obviously, it's very important for anyone that's going to target these fish to read up on the current legislation, the current, size and bag limit, which is obviously one fish. Remind our listeners, what's the current size limit for striped bass?
This year it is 20 to 24 inches, I
Mm,
believe. I'm thinking 19, but I think it's 20 to 24
okay.
this year. And as an example, last year it was 33, I believe. So it's
Okay.
a drastic change. last year you could keep up to almost a 33 incher, and the difference between a 24 and a 33 inch fish is significant. So 22 looks like a dink compared to a 34.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
It is a big change, and of course being just a one fish possession, and then just me and a lot of other people that used to striped bass fish a lot when the size limits were different and the catch limits were different and fish were more abundant. It's a drastic change. So in all honesty, another couple of weeks, I won't even stripe bass fish. I'll just focus on togging around the Bay Bridge and some inshore wrecks and things like that. But for a couple of weeks out of the year, these days, I do like to target striped bass, and then I'll get back to togging.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I did, just curious, to make sure we're being accurate. So vmrc.virginia.gov, you can go look at the saltwater fishing regulations, and the current fall season for Virginia. So there's a spring season, then there's a fall season, is October 4th through December 31st, and it is 19 inches to 24 inches with a limit of 1. And of course, they also cite, no gaffing. And of course, you got to use that inline circle hook. So, man, that's exciting to hear. I know you guys are going to be doing some togging as well too. Just a real brief overview when you're out there togging. Brief overview of kind of areas that you like to get located in, and then what your typical bait of choice is and terminal tackle.
Oh yeah, I do a lot of togging in the spring and the falls, and I prepare a lot in the summer for tog fishing. For instance, I use fiddler crabs predominantly in the Chesapeake Bay. So I kind of stock up on fiddler crabs when it starts getting cooler, because the fiddler crabs will bury themselves in the mud once it's cold and you can't find them. So I spend a couple of weeks kind of catching fiddler crabs and bagging them. So right now in my freezer, I have 1,600 fiddler crabs.
Oh, wow.
And I over a couple of weeks, 100 here, 200 there, 300 there, I'll catch them. Then I literally will rinse them off, bring them up in the kitchen, put 50 in a bag and vacuum pack them. And so I have like 32 bags with 50 in each that'll last me till spring for fishing in the bay. Because most time if I'm in the bay, I'm going to use fiddler crabs. I mean, there's so many different baits you can use. But for me, a fiddler crab is I can catch them, I can freeze them. It's something that I don't have to go look for. I can't find crabs, but the frozen fiddler crabs work very well. Nothing is better than live. But if you vacuum pack and freeze them and clean them, I'm meaning rinse them off so it's not a bag full of mud before you freeze them, they do work very well. The longer you have them in the freezer, if you have them in there for 2 years, a lot of times they're going to crumble more when you thaw them out, but they're good for at least a year that way. So that's my favorite bait is fiddler crabs, but I use clams sometimes. I use hard crab sometimes, but 90% of the time I'm using a fiddler crab.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. And then in terms of like your rod and reel and line weight, what do you like to use when you're out there on your jet ski targeting those togs?
Yeah, and that varies. For me, it depends on where I'm fishing, how deep I'm fishing, and for the last year, like a lot of people, last couple of years, everyone's get into the bottom sweeper jig type things for tog, and I use those for togs and for sheep's head. And I used to be just a straight up and down bottom fisher, and I have the last couple of years started using these jigs as well. But the jigs are great to me if the current is not ripping. There's days where I just can't get a bite or a hook set trying to use a jig, so then I'll switch to a bottom rig, a typical mono bottom rig with maybe a 3 or 4/0 hook and a 3-ounce to 8-ounce sinker depending on the current. But I typically prefer, when the current is ripping around the Bay Bridge, I use a straight up and down bottom rig. And if the current is a little bit less, I'll switch up to a jig. So a lot of it depends on how fast the current is and how deep it is. So it's I use both. But I'm an Avid guy. I have several Avids of different sizes. And I'm on my bottom rig in deeper water. I might have, I have 30 or 35 pound test braid with a 20 pound mono leader. I don't personally use fluoro for togs. They're not real leader shy.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I'm using a jig, I typically use a spinning rod, and I have
Mm-hmm.
a couple different Shimano reels for that, and I have a lighter tip for that as well. And I'm using 20-pound braid and a 20-pound fluoro leader because a lot of times I'm also getting sheep's head, and I think sheeps are a little bit more timid than a tog are, but I use the same rod for sheep's head and for tog. So I use a
Ah,
spinner for the jigs, and I use a level wind conventional reel for straight up and down bottom fishing for me.
okay. That makes sense. And it's cool to know that we've got all these different species available, whether it's the striped bass, the tog, or maybe still running into some of these sheep's head. When's the last time you've seen a sheep's head caught here in the Chesapeake Bay, or is there a typical water temperature where it's like, okay, after this temp break, we just aren't going to really see them anymore?
I mean, I know they're still there. The last time I caught one was maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit less than 2 weeks ago. And that was over the islands of the third and fourth island, but they're not there as thick as they were, definitely as it gets cooler.
Hmm.
Uh, so I'd say probably when it starts getting to around 65, you get less and less sheep's head, and probably by 60, 58 degrees, you see very few sheep's head.
Hmm.
But I'll catch sheep's head almost all winter long at some of the near shore wrecks, 10, 12 miles off of Virginia Beach. But you can get a 5 or 6 degree temperature difference being warmer just going 10 miles out. So it's
Got it.
I've got sheeps in January, uh, you know, at the Chesapeake Tower Reef area sometimes. But there is less and less in the bay as the water gets cooler. And right now it's still warm for me for tog because there's so many little black sea bass and oyster toads and blow toads that are tearing up your bait. Right now it's 65 degrees. Give it another couple of weeks, it'll be 55, and you'll have almost all tog instead of all of the little junkfish stealing your bait.
Got it. That makes sense. Well, man, it sounds like your some of your fishing is just heating up, especially knowing that you've got that what was the thing called? The fire the suit, the
It's like the same thing the Coast Guard wears. It looks like a float suit, so it looks like coveralls, but
okay.
it keeps the wind off of me. It keeps the spray off of me. It's not totally waterproof if you're getting really heavy spray or a lot of rain, but it's pretty rare that I get wet in it. But it's a Mustang
Mustang.
survival suit, or sometimes they call it a work suit. That's one brand. Stearns makes those type of brands as well. But I've had this particular suit for probably 10 years, and you can buy them new. You can buy them used. It's like $600 for a new one, but you can pick them up online for probably $200. And like I said, in the wintertime, it's very comfortable. For me on the jet ski, I'm just sitting there, so I'm not doing a lot unless I'm catching fish.
Hmm.
So it's nice to be able to stay warm. But I wear head covering and ski goggles and thick gloves and thick boots when it gets real cold. Kind of
That's
like you're
awesome.
going. People say, "Oh, how come you're not cold in the wintertime?" I say, "Well, look, you're on top of a mountain snow skiing,
Yep.
and you're comfortable." And I'm like, if you dress properly in the wintertime, you can be comfortable fishing as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Brian, it's always a joy to talk to you and just get to hear some of the stories and just learn how you've adapted to the fishery using your PWC. If folks that are listening want to follow you on social media and follow along with your adventures, what's the best way for them to find you?
Pretty much, I post on mostly just Facebook at this point, and I'm on there as Brian Brianm Lockwood, but I post to a lot of other sites on Facebook, mostly PWC sites and outdoor sites like yours.
Hmm.
And I post. I live in Pocosin, so there's a Facebook page for Pocosin fishing that I post a lot of stuff on as well. But there's several jet ski fishing sites that I do post my fishing trips on as well. And I correspond with a lot of other people that are into that. In New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia, there's a lot of people that PWC fish. So I do post on some of their sites as well.
That's awesome. Well, I just enjoy the conversation and just the education that you provide. And I will say this, folks that want to learn, Brian is a great guy to follow because he is very open and shares a lot about, where he was and what he was fishing for. And it's just really helpful to just, maybe beginners to be able to like glean some information from you. So thank you so much for being an educator and a voice of, sustainability as well, and, playing by the rules and doing the right things, because it goes a long way, to supporting the fishing community as a whole.
Well, great, Luke. I really appreciate it. I'm glad your show's been working out good, and I enjoy listening to it, and look forward to talking to you again in the future too.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Brian. Folks, stick around for a word from our sponsors. Their generosity towards us makes this show free for you each and every week. We'll be right back here just after a word from them. It's time we talked about catching some serious savings. Imagine harnessing the power of the sun to cut your energy bills and having a roof that's built to last. Convert Solar and Roofing specializes in top-notch solar installations and durable roofing solutions that stand up to the toughest elements. Their solar panels are designed to maximize efficiency, and their roofs are built with premium materials to ensure long-lasting protection. Whether you're out on the water or at home, their expert team ensures you're covered. As fellow anglers in the Lower Chesapeake Bay, the team at Convert Solar and Roofing cares about both sustainable living and sustainable fishing. So reel in those savings today and visit www.convert-solar.com or call 757-44-SOLAR. Make your energy and roof as reliable as your favorite fishing lure. Call Convert Solar and Roofing today. Pure Flat slick lures are tried, true, and guide approved. Slick lures catch big speckled trout, redfish, flounder, and more. You can cast them a mile, and they produce a highly erratic bait fish imitation with a twitching retrieve. The tournament-winning slick has helped many anglers set personal best records. Whether you're fishing the OG slick, the smaller profile slick junior, or the versatile lil slick, one is sure to find that unforgettable thump we're all after. Visit your local tackle retailer or pureflats.com for your favorite color and rigging combination. Go sling some slicks today. You can't catch them on the sofa. All right, y'all. Well, welcome to the final segment of this week. We're going to dive into a topic that is exciting right now as the season changed, speckled trout. We have Captain Travis Kemp with Foolproof Fishing back on the show. Captain Travis, how we doing, man? Welcome back.
Pretty good, pretty good. How you doing, Luke?
Good, man. It was great to see you last night at the meeting, and I understand right before we hit record, you were telling me a little bit about what you got going on with the boat right now. Your hands and your hair are all blue. What's that all about?
Yeah, bottom paint madness, man. I should have done a little bit more, or a few more coats, I should say, earlier this spring, and I wouldn't have to be doing this all again. But was in a hurry to get it in the water, and here we are doing it again.
Yeah, well, bottom paint is important, especially for guys like yourself that keep the boat in the water. Keeping those barnacles and that growth off that bottom is critical. So all your sweat and hard work is definitely worth it, keeping that thing clean.
That's right. That's right. Clean boat's a happy boat, and a happy boat catches fish.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I was just talking about how daggone cold it is all of a sudden. You said the wind had changed. What do you think is going to be coming up? Are you prepping to get the boat back into the river so you guys can chase some of those speckled trout?
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. Once I get this bottom paint done and, a few other little miniature odd and ends for the maintenance stuff, I'm hoping to get it in a slip in the river and start running some speckled trout trips. The bite has been pretty unbelievable already.
Oh, that's exciting to hear. So when you say river, a couple rivers around this area, which river are you going to be targeting?
The river, the Elizabeth River.
And you're taking me back to the old days of the hot ditch back when, been over 12, 15 years now. I've got my start fishing from a kayak in that river. And man, I tell you what, those are some fun times back when that hot ditch was running and those big trout were rolling through there and big puppy drum. Is it still like that, or has it changed?
It's taken some years for it to get, kind of settled into a normal, but it's pretty good. A lot of big fish and a lot of fish. I wouldn't say it's hot ditch standards, like the old days where on, any day you could catch a 30-incher over there, but
yeah,
no, it's certainly good. A lot of quality fish.
Do you guys still go over, we called it the Party Cove. Is that still a hot ticket place, or is that kind of washed out just due to pressure?
Well, I think that they call that Bryan's Cove now, and there's condos around it and a little park and everything and a big dock out in the side of it.
Oh my.
But it's definitely still a place where people go, and there's usually any given day that is fishable, there's a boat goes in there.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, you'd see a lot of guys using those slip bobber rigs. It took a little while to figure out how to work that, but that kind of seemed to be the go-to is a slip bobber rig with a mud minnow.
Mm-hmm. Yep, anything from mud minnows to a 7-inch mullet. I've seen
Phew.
it.
So, the water in the Elizabeth River, in contrast to the Lynnhaven, and I should make a little disclaimer. We're probably going to hear some big fish stories, from Captain Travis. For those of you that are in Troutzilla, Long Bay Point, are one of our sponsors, hosting a speckled trout tournament. You got to be in the waters of the Lynnhaven for that tournament. So don't get any bright ideas here and Captain Travis talk about the big fish in the Elizabeth. But the water over there is so different in terms of its color. Why is that in contrast to like the Lynnhaven?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you with 100% certainty, but I would say it's probably just darker from the tannins in the water. It's more inland, a little more fresh, a lot more leaves and mud bottom. But Lynnhaven has a lot more tidal flow. Closer to the bay, you get a lot cleaner water in there.
That makes sense. So the Elizabeth is aged like a good whiskey in a barrel, just picks up all those tannins. And does that impact the way that you target, speckled trout in contrast to the Lynnhaven, for example, where maybe there's a little bit more clarity and they can get their eyes on it a little bit better? Or do you kind of use similar tactics?
It's pretty similar. There's only a few times that, you'll adjust mainly just the color of your bait, more or less because of the color of the water. Lynnhaven, and other places where you have a lot cleaner water, especially, I do a lot of speckled trout surf fishing. We'll use lighter, translucent colors, stuff like that. But when you're fishing in the darker waters, contrast to popular belief, a lot of times darker colors and more, natural purples, browns, stuff like that do better.
Interesting. Yeah, you mentioned you fish for them from the surf. Memory serves, you just recently won a drum tournament.
Yeah, my team, the Foolproof Fishing Team, we won most drum as a team, and Kyle, one of my buddies, won most drum as an individual in the North Carolina Beach Buggy Tournament.
Oh man, congratulations!
Yeah, man, thank you.
That's awesome. So, what was the total number of you guys won? Total number of drum caught between the two of you. What was that total number?
10. We caught 10 in 60 hours, 10 drum, and of those, 9 of them were, citation size, 40+ inch fish in North Carolina. It's 40 inches.
That is awesome. All from shore. Man, that's fantastic.
Yep.
All right. So speckled trout, they like a little bit darker natural color. When you get into the Elizabeth River, what are you looking for when you try to get located on an area that you're going to start making some casts over there? What do you like to look for in terms of those bottom features or water temperatures? What are some of those standout features that kind of draw you in?
A lot of it is the water temperature and, the actual outside conditions, which way the wind's blowing, the air temperature, things like that determine where the fish typically stage up. And then me personally, I rely heavily on my electronics to know where the fish are. When you're trying to be quick and I guess accurate with where you're at and where you're fishing, electronics are worth their weight in gold because you don't waste time casting somewhere where there's no fish. I can find them, know they're there, and then, we find out what they want to eat.
Yeah, and that's, I'm sure, always the tricky part. So when you head out on a day on the Elizabeth River, how many different rods do you have on board? What type of rods and reels, and what would be your kind of mainstays that you have tied up and ready to throw when you do get located on some fish?
Well, my favorite way to catch them is top water. I can't lie there. Catching them on top water is probably the most fun way to catch them, but it's not realistic to do that every day. So I would say probably the most all-around bait for me to use is going to be like a Paul Brown, so lure like that, or, a mirror lure like a 27 MR, and then you've always got the soft plastic and the jig head, which is good anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, and those Paul Browns or the mirror lures, are you a stock hook guy, or do you like to go in there and change hooks out and put something a little bit different on?
Every now and then I'll put the old feather hook on the back, get a little Little teaser back there.
Back in the day, I did the same, and I was a big fan of the Procure gel. I don't know if you still find that to be effective or not, but that little feather in the back, I always thought that was a good place to dab some of that stuff on, because I always just pictured it leaving a nice little trail behind for those trout to pick up on and hopefully follow and find that bait.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a little bit of Procure goes a long way. Now, I will say probably one of the easiest ways to catch them, which if you go in the Elizabeth River and you see what everybody else is doing, it's trolling. If I'm going fishing for myself, I'm not a huge fan of it. Although, for charter fishing and things like that, when you have, especially kids or less experienced anglers, trolling is certainly a very effective way to fish.
I do recall seeing that back in the day, and a typical trolling setup, you'd have same rods that you'd maybe cast with. And what are you trolling? Are you just trolling paddle tails or jigs?
Yep, just curl tails or paddle tails on a jig head, or swim baits like a storm shad or something like that. Some guys will troll mirror lures, but that gets expensive.
Well, I gotta tell you this story, because I didn't know anything about fishing back when I went on that river for the first few times. And there was an old man from my church named Cliff Copeland, and he used to be a professional bass fisherman. And he took me out there, and the reason I tell this story is because you said a name of a lure earlier that brings back some funny memories. But I fished with him for months, and we'd go out there in his little aluminum boat, and he'd catch 10 fish to my one every single time. And I'd get so frustrated. He'd just sit over there and chuckle and chuckle. And so finally one day I'm like, man, would you just tell me what it is? And, he slowly but surely spoon fed me some information and helped me to learn to think about the lure in the water and to really imagine its movements and, almost anticipate and feel that trout's mouth attacking the lure. But it was after some time that he finally looked over at me and said, here, why don't you tie one of these on? And I said, what is this? And he's like, I won't tell you. And it wasn't until several months after that he finally told me that it was the Paul Brown, and he had been buying them directly from Paul Brown back in the day from Florida for years. And anyways, it was just hilarious. He kept that secret from me for a long time before he finally told me what it was that he was fishing with. But that is definitely a great lure. The action on those things is remarkable. They got that little bead inside of them for that little bit of a clack. Got to fish them slow though, especially as those temperatures drop. What temperature would you say in the water is like when you get to a certain temp, when do you really start to slow things down?
Man, I mean, we've caught them down into the 40s, and you're fishing super slow, almost painfully slow. There's some times when I fish in some spots in North Carolina where when we're fishing, some of the kayak guys will tell you that they'll jig their mirror lure 2 or 3 times and then send a text message before they pick the rod back up and jig it again.
Man, that is that requires some patience and almost operate with a great sense of hope that there is going to be a bite that comes. I forget who it was we were talking with recently about favorite bait or this, that, or the other, and the advice was, you gotta fish with a great sense of hope, a great sense of optimism, because it's going to help you to stick to that plan, to be patient. Whereas, me, I'm very ADHD, and I cast that thing out there and I don't get a bite within the first couple twitches, I'm liable to just crank it on back in. But the reality is you need to leave that thing in the water and work it faithfully with a great sense of hope all the way back to the water, all back to the boat.
That's right. And I mean, a big thing that we do, you can ask Jack, a king tide Jack. I fished with him a couple weeks ago in Lynnhaven, and the fish would not bite anything but a topwater. We threw every kind of mirror lure, softines, jig head, soft plastics, and we'd get a few bites, but man, they were eating topwater. We were fishing flat, which is, it's a good topwater location, but it was just strange to not get many bites on anything else, that they were crushing topwater. So, we do a lot of bait changing to find out what the fish want.
And when it comes to bait changing, are you cutting and retying? Are you using speed clips, tying loop knots? Like what do you typically do for those specs?
Now, a lot of times I'll use a little tactical angler's clip. I don't like it when I'm fishing topwaters. So I usually have a rod with a topwater lure on it at all times.
Yeah.
And that one just kind of stays as the topwater rod, and the other
Right.
two will be switching out baits with a quick clip.
Yep. That's a great tip right there, because you're much more likely to actually change a bait out and try something different when it's the barrier of entry is lowered, because you can use that quick little speed clip instead of cutting and retying. So for those listening, definitely add that to your arsenal and your tackle bag to have. They sell them at Long Bay Point and other places, where just a little clip that you tie on, get the lowest profile one that you can manage with your fingers, because you don't want to scare the fish away with it. But they do work great.
That's right.
And they function like a loop knot in a sense, right? Where you get that little bit extra action out of each twitch.
Yeah. Yep. A little bit more action. It adds a little bit of weight to the nose of, you don't want to use it on like a 17. I wouldn't personally use it on like a 17 MR, because that's such a small profile lure, light lure, that you add weight to the front of it, it's gonna swim differently. But anything like a soft Dean XL, Fat Boys, twitch baits, jerk baits, things like that, soft plastics on jig heads, to me, I don't think it makes a difference. I actually think it helps add a little bit of action to it.
That makes sense. And then you mentioned fishing with Captain Jack on king tide, and they were only responding to the top water. Describe the conditions? Like what depth were you in? What was the water temp, air temp, time of day?
Man, you're asking too many questions, Luke.
We want to know. Don't tell me where, but just give me a little insight.
Nah, it was probably 3 foot deep, and it was the middle of the night, slick calm.
Okay, got it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
The speckled trout, it's such an illustrious fish in terms of like what it'll turn on to sometimes, and then other times not. And over the years, how much credit do you give to moon phase? You take a situation like that, middle of the night, slick calm, which, by the way, that in and of itself takes a certain level of commitment to either stay up late enough or get up early enough to go make that happen. But moon phase, do you feel that plays a part at all?
Absolutely. Now, I can't go on here and tell you that I am 100% having that dialed in. I have some guys that are guides that strictly speckled trout fish down in Carolina that swear by the majors and the minors and things like that, and when the fish are going to bite on this condition on this part of the moon phase, and they've got it dialed in. I'm getting there. If there's fish out there and I see them, I can generally scrap out a few bites, but these guys, they won't even go unless they know it's going to be perfect, and then they just go hammer them. That's something that I'm working towards.
Yeah. Well, and then I'll ask you this question. Speaking of hammering them, we've been having a lot of conversation recently about sustainable practices and taking ownership as recreational anglers, and of course as charter guides. The terminology release over 20. When you hear that, what does that mean to you, and why do you feel that that's important?
For me personally, I'm not a huge fan of eating trout, so they pretty much all get let go.
Yeah.
But for charters and sustainability in that route, I try to encourage it. But at the end of the day, it's if it's legal and they want to do it, they can keep what they want to keep. All we can do is encourage people to practice sustainable harvest.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day too, it's just the thrill of the chase. I think that you said earlier you love that top water bite the most. I feel like that's the cobia fisherman in you. Is like something about a visual bite is just nothing beats it. It's so fun.
Yeah. Saturday night I fished the Elizabeth for the first time this fall. I've fished Lynnhaven quite a few times, and just finally had the opportunity, now that all my surf fishing tournaments have come to an end, and snuck out there as soon as I got home from Hatteras. And Saturday night, me and my buddy Andy, who's on my surf fishing team, we went out there and smoked them on topwaters for
that's awesome
3 hours. I think we didn't have any real giants, but he did manage one 24-incher, and I had probably 10 that were over 20.
That's awesome. What's your personal best in terms of total length?
My personal best is 28.5. I have not broken the 30-inch mark like a lot of people have nowadays, but
Yep. You and me both.
It'll happen. It'll happen.
Oh yeah. We were discussing offline our ages, and we've got plenty of years ahead of us to figure that 30 plus inch fish out. And it's just cool to get to experience such a neat fishery. Again, like zoom out and look at a map, the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries and the rivers. I mean, we live in an absolute heaven for fishing, and to have this sort of fishery available to us in these, colder months that even get better as these temperatures cool off is just a true blessing. And it's awesome to know that we now have some options for charters like yourself to get out there and go experience it. So folks that are listening, they're like, man, I got to get on that. I got to get on that bite. I got to experience that. When are you going to start running those trips, and how can folks get up with you and book one of them?
The trips should be starting within the next week or so. And if anybody is trying to contact me, Foolproof Fishing on Facebook or Instagram, or just give me a call. So it's just 252-435-5967.
Awesome. Well, Captain Travis, it's always a pleasure to get to talk to you, pick your brain, learn some things, and just talk a little fishing. So thanks for being on the show, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, man. Well, that's going to wrap up a really cool segment talking about the river, as Captain Travis refers to it. Y'all stick around for our word for our sponsors, and we'll be back here with you soon for the What Did You Learn segment. Tired of battling salt corrosion on your boat, trailer, and reels? Meet Salt's Gone, your ultimate solution. This powerful, instantly acting chelating agent tackles salt and brine with ease, featuring corrosion inhibitors to protect against future damage and surfactants for a thorough clean. Salt's Gone is pH neutral, making it safe for all boat materials: metal, glass, paint, vinyl wraps, and more. Highly concentrated, just 1 gallon creates 100 gallons of ready-to-use solution. Apply it with or without running water. It's perfect for any situation. Use code GREATDAYS10 to save 10% at saltsgone.com. Or if you need faster delivery, use Amazon or your favorite retailer. Sam Rust Seafood, your locally trusted source for premium wholesale seafood. Servicing customers from Hampton Roads down through the Outer Banks, Richmond, and surrounding areas, including Fredericksburg, Charlottesville, and Lynchburg, for over 80 years. Committed to the highest standards in the industry, Sam Rust distributes the best of the ocean directly to your restaurant, hotel, or grocery store on time and at a great price. Visit samrust.com to discover how quality, tradition, and sustainability come together. So don't cuss, call Sam Rust. All right, guys, let's dive into the What Did You Learn? So going back to some of the conversation with Chris Ludford, guys, just clearly a wealth of knowledge, and there's really, in my opinion, no better opportunity than to have a conversation with someone who's lived on the water and worked on the water their whole life. It was just incredibly beneficial to get to hear from him and gain some perspective on how things work, why they work the way that they work. And I'd say for me, the learning lesson from this is just, to look for opportunities to get involved and participate in ways that are, being part of the solution. So going and attending meetings, when there's opportunities to vote online, to vote, and just really, be part of the solution. Like he said, being a keyboard warrior or, complaining, that's not going to really do anything to help. But actually, doing responsible harvest practices and being a part of these meetings when we have the opportunity is going to be the ticket. And then talking to Brian Lockwood, aka Jet Ski Brian, definitely picked up a couple of tips and tricks. I'd say the one thing I learned to be mindful of is make sure that we're paying close attention to the regulations. This year, it's the season requirements for length are 19 to 24 inches slot, and then we got to remember to be using those inline circle hooks. And then lastly, talking to Captain Travis about speckled trout fishing and, just really paying close attention to those water temperatures and the speed of what you're doing with your lure, I think is a big ticket item that I picked up from chatting with him. And then lastly, we've got our sponsorship with Sam Rust Seafood, who is one of the premier quality seafood providers here in the East Coast region. And I had the pleasure of chatting with Bruce Edmonds, who has been around for a long time, selling seafood in the area. And he gave me a couple of tips for some great local restaurants where Sam Russ supplies the fresh seafood items that you'll see on the menu. So going into the weekend, if you're looking to get out there and enjoy some great fresh seafood from one of our sponsors, you can look at Waterman's Surfside Grill down there at the oceanfront. Dockside is a great place there on the water, offshore drive, where you can enjoy all sorts of fried, broiled seafood items. If you're ever on the Eastern Shore, a really cool spot. It's kind of like the Chick's Oyster Bar down here is the Shanty. They're positioned right on the waterway there, where you've got a beautiful view of the water, while you can enjoy some great local fresh seafood. And then two more are Island House as well as Fuller's Raw Bar. And if you haven't been into the Phoebus area of Hampton in a while, it is dramatically different from the way it was even 10 years ago. All sorts of new buildings, new architecture, and a couple of really great new restaurants. And Fuller's Raw Bar is one of them. So as you look into the weekend, throw some of those restaurant options on your schedule to get out and visit and enjoy some fresh local seafood. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in this week. We look forward to talking to you soon. Be good out there, and tight lines to you.
Air Medcare. Would your insurance cover an air ambulance in a medical emergency? The fact is, insurance often doesn't cover the full cost of medical flights, leaving you and your loved ones at financial risk. But with an Air Medcare network membership, you can focus on recovery and not on finances should the unexpected happen. Air Medcare takes care of everything, with no costs for flights only when flown by one of our providers. Membership covers your full household and starts at $99 a year. Visit gdo.deals/airmedcare to enroll.
So that's going to wrap it up this week. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, to get your free AFTCO Camo Sunglasses Cleaning Cloth, just text the acronym LCBFR to 779-345-2918 to get your promo code and be added to our email list so we can send you the new show each week. You guys keep whacking them and be safe out there.